Welcome back, everyone. I'm Julia, your host of the Mentorship Podcast, a series that features diverse industry professionals. We mentor you by highlighting various fields and breaking down each step of our guest's career path, from high school to their current role. In today's episode, we are joined by Dr. Shawna Pandya, a physician and Scientist-Astronaut candidate. Dr. Pandya received a Bachelor of Science with a major in neuroscience from the University of Alberta. She then received a Master of Science in Space Studies from the International Space University, before returning back to the University of Alberta to complete her medical degree. In this conversation, Dr. Pandya tells us all about how she merged her passions through the field of space medicine. So now, here to mentor us, it is Dr. Shawna Pandya. Welcome, Shawna, to the Mentorship Podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. How are you feeling?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on, Julia.
Yes, I'm really excited because you have such a diverse career. There's so much to get into. I can't wait to hear about all of it. But in order to really learn about you and your whole journey, we're going to start right from the beginning. My first question for you is, what did you want to be when you grew up, and what kind of things interested you when you were younger?
Oh gosh, yeah. So the short answer is I wanted to be an astronaut, but there's a bit of a longer segue to that. So it started with me being a very ambitious child. And so first I wanted to be a superhero, like a transformer, and fight crime and rid the world of evil as a 4-year-old. And then I realized I couldn't be Optimus Prime. So I needed to grow up and be more realistic. So then by the time I was 7, it was like, okay, I'll be a billionaire. I'll be like Bill Gates and I'll solve all the world's problems and, help people. And then I also realized that, well, that's not really something you can go to school to do. And then I also grew up in the 90s in Canada when we saw Canada's first female astronaut, Dr. Roberta Bondar, go to space. And I realized, oh my gosh, we can do that. So, having her as a role model was tremendously inspiring. So I said, that's what I want to do. I want to be an astronaut. And from then on in, my course was set. Every single school assignment, every book I checked out from the library was all geared at space, astronomy, astronauts. And that, really is what inspired me to go study the path that I did, because Dr. Bonder was a physician, a neurologist, and then an astronaut. So I said, okay, well, I'm going to study neuroscience, be a physician, and then be an astronaut. And in my child mind, it was that simple. And that's what set me out on that path.
I can imagine that at 7 years old and around that time when you were a child, you were probably so inquisitive and curious. Just even knowing who Bill Gates was at 7 is so interesting.
Yeah, and there was, I think there was a lot of opportunities that, when you're a kid, your world is your normal. So whatever you see inside the four walls of your house, to you, that's everyone's universe is like that. And so I was really lucky in a lot of respects in that my parents were outdoorsy and adventurous. They took us camping all the time. And then I was a Girl Guide as well. So I grew up doing all of this camping and was adventurous. So I'd also be privy to these beautiful views of the night sky. And, two memories really stick out at me. Once when we were 7, we were camping in August during I think it was the Perseids meteor shower. And we just stayed up till 2 a.m. watching shooting stars. And they were just, they were so frequent and dazzling. It was just this memory that's etched in my mind. And then later when I was 10, this was kind of when I think the Mariner and Viking rovers landed on Mars. This is about early 90s. We were camping in the Pacific Northwest, and so we were privy to these amazing night skies where the belt, the spiral arm of the Milky Way galaxy would just leap out at you, and you're just thinking, I want to be part of that. And everywhere we went, we'd go to little gift shops, and I would see books on astronomy, like those little pocket books, or I would see the USA Today headline of evidence of microbial life on Mars, and beg my parents to buy it for me. So it was just being in these environments that also helped foster that curiosity.
Yeah, it's interesting that you gravitated to this field at such a young age too, and the fact that it was really standing out to you, and the things that you were doing with your family kind of situated you too to be more exposed to it. So it's really interesting. It's almost like, destined in a way. as you were going through high school and starting to prepare more for your career later on, what were you thinking for university programs for what you wanted to pursue after high school?
Yeah, there was no question in my mind. By the time I was in grade 10, when I was 15, knew I was going to go study honors neuroscience. And then
Mm.
with the path towards becoming a neurosurgeon, like it wasn't like I am just going to be a doctor. I'm not going to, I'm going to aim for straight for neurosurgery. And that, there was no question about that. And then it was really interesting because I kind of lost the forest for the trees. I got so focused on neuroscience, which is this incredibly fascinating field, a rapidly growing field, that by the time it came to time to apply for medical school, I kind of took a pause and took a step back and said, okay, like I need to be realistic. Not everyone gets into medical school. Like it
Mm.
is, there are incredible candidates who are not even getting interviews. So I need to have a backup plan. I need to have a plan B. And then that was kind of, reflecting on my journey and what had prompted it all. It was this love of space. Everything, my other secondary objectives were seeking out opportunities and internships and interest groups in space. And at the time there weren't very many. But I heard of this place that I wasn't really sure if it existed because it sounded too amazing. It was called the International Space University, and it was this physical place in Strasbourg, France. It was a school where you could do your master's degree in space studies. And so I thought, okay, well, that will be where I go if I don't go to medical school. And so I applied to the master's program. And to my surprise, I got into both
Oh,
ISU
wow.
and medical school. And that was the first time I was put in the position of having to make a really hard decision, a really good decision, but a really hard decision. And I lost a lot of sleep over it. And then I realized, look, that, there's no harm in asking. And I was pretty upfront with my faculty of medicine as like, medicine is my first priority. I will absolutely, pass this opportunity by if you say no, but can I be granted a deferral? And to my surprise, they said yes. Like maybe they're in an alternate universe. There's a version of me who didn't have that opportunity because being at the International Space University was being at Starfleet Academy. It was a game changer. That was the first time I really realized you can make space and space medicine part of your career. I didn't even know that space medicine was a thing. And so
Yes.
at this university, their whole philosophy is international, intercultural, interdisciplinary.
Mm.
And so we had 50 students from 31 countries. We had geologists, we had lawyers, we had engineers. I was the only medical person. And at that point, I wasn't even medical because I wasn't in medical school yet. But you would have little blocks and lectures that focused on rocketry and propulsion, and of course, life sciences and medicine. And I really became interested in the medicine. And so that actually tailored where I did my master's internship. And I was lucky enough to intern at the European Astronaut Center, which is one of the divisions of the European Space Agency, with their crew medical support office. And my project was to create a quick reference manual for a brand new delivery vehicle to the International Space Station. And it was then that I realized, like, people make careers out of this. I was able to meaningfully contribute to human spaceflight, and this spark had been lit, and that kept me, just it opened a whole world of possibilities as to where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do next.
Yeah, I feel like you answered so many of my questions in that. I want to dissect every part of it. I even want to go back as far as just when you chose neuroscience and you were talking about how you were interested in neurology and doing brain surgery, things like that. Where did that come from? Was that from seeing your role model of Roberta Bondar and seeing how she studied neurology as well?
That's where it started. Like I think but it continued far beyond that, because it's one thing to see something that is out there in the world that you think, hey, that's cool, I want to do that. But once you do it, once you study neuroanatomy and neurodegenerative diseases and aging, and those were literal courses I did in my undergrad, it's fascinating. And that was, the early 2000s. The level of research and knowledge that we've gleaned since then is just exponential. It's orders of magnitude above and beyond what we knew 20 years ago. So it was it started with having a role model, and it continued by simply loving the field. And there were actually some synergies between space and surgery and neuroscience, as it turned
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, because at first it seems like two completely separate fields, and I'm so excited to really get into it and talk about how they really merge, especially in your career. It's interesting. I would have imagined as a kid or a young student looking at Roberta Bondar's path and seeing how she was a neurologist and then an astronaut. It seems like something that's so disconnected in a way. In general, when you had that vision to be a part of the space industry, whether it be an astronaut or just involved in space studies in general, did you have a path kind of laid out in a way where you could look up something, a typical path to become an astronaut? Is there a typical path? That's something that's really interesting to me because it's a career that we see from childhood, but we don't really know how to get there. So, what were you kind of learning at that time, even outside of seeing how your role model had pursued it?
Yeah, it is and it isn't. Like there is no stereotypical astronaut. There are paths towards becoming an astronaut. So you see, a lot of military and a lot of military pilots, and that is by virtue of the origins of human spaceflight. It currently is this amazing medium for international collaboration and science and exploration. But realistically, it came from the Cold War. It came from this showdown of technological and political superiority between the Soviet Union and the United States. And they were sending their military male Caucasian pilots. So some of that history does carry over. Only 12% of astronauts to date have been women. So you will see a lot of pilots, a lot of military backgrounds within the astronaut cohorts within space agencies with NASA, the Canadian Space Agency, the European Space Agency. But you'll also see a strong preponderance for STEM degrees, so science, technology, engineering, math. And that's because now space is very heavily focused on science and discovery and exploration. And so in previous NASA and CSA selections, the requirements will have been have a STEM degree with minimum 3 years work experience and or an advanced degree like a master's, PhD, and MD, because they want to see that you're able to do a deep dive and become very, very good in your own field, while also being able to learn skills across domains outside your own.
Okay, yes, that gives such a great perspective and how to kind of navigate that pathway. And so I loved hearing about when you were finishing your undergrad in neuroscience and kind of deciding what to do from there. And you got into both programs, the Space Studies Master's program and your medical program. It's interesting to see how you were able to then even learn after about how you could combine the two of them. So I would love to hear about that. I think first, let's go into a bit more on your master's program. If you could tell us about that in terms of what you were studying there and what you learned.
Yeah, absolutely. So coming back to this idea of international, intercultural, interdisciplinary, every day was this whole new adventure of things I had previously never studied. We would learn about astrobiology, and we would learn about planetary geology, and then you could also learn about politics and space policy and law and the Outer Space Treaty. You would learn about how governmental space agencies operated. Um, you would learn about space life sciences. And then you could also, most of our work was in teams, very, very team based. And so you really learned to how engineers worked, how folks from different parts of the world, different work styles, all of that, it became quickly learn to adapt and focus on mission outcomes and your team objectives. But you also had the opportunity to do your own personal research papers. That was also included in the curriculum. And that's when I would tailor my passion and my interests in both space medicine, because I was interested in medicine. I love space, but also coming back to this childhood underlying theme of just wanting to do good. and do good in the world. So some of my papers were on telemedicine for the developing world and how we could use technologies used to communicate with astronauts on the space shuttle or on the space station, to help overcome disparity in healthcare delivery in remote and rural regions all across the planet.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I love seeing how everything came together through this program as well, and how you had the opportunity to come back to medical school too. So I would love to hear then about that transition once you finished your master's program in space studies and then entered back into medical school, which you had deferred. You're actually our first medical doctor that's come on the podcast. And usually when we have a really big career that people like to kind of put as a goal for themselves, like a doctor, dentist, pharmacist. We kind of go through every single step of the way. But because your career is so diverse, I'm not going to focus too much on every single step of becoming a doctor. So I'll focus more on your medical school program, hearing about how it was for you, what kind of things you learned, if you did certain specializations, things like that, kind of how the landscape of it was.
Sure. So right off the bat, I had a very, very supportive medical school. And so I think I was afforded a lot of opportunities that I probably would not have been afforded at other medical schools. And so just starting to with prefacing that. So by the time I came back to medical school, I was bitten by the space bug. Like I just loved all things space and I didn't want that spark to die off and just for it to be a one-off. And so I kept an eye out for opportunities, and we were lucky in that. So part of continuing on from the curriculum of the master's program, you also have a big kind of capstone project called the team project. And you're given, one of two topics to choose from. And as a group of, 20, 30 individuals, you work together to create this compendium that will contribute in some way to space science or benefit for Earth. And so we had focused ours on lunar exploration, and we had a paper accepted at one of the world's biggest space conferences called the International Astronautical Congress. So we were lucky in that we had that opportunity. We had a little bit of funding to go to that conference, and then coming back to where my med school was supportive, they allowed me. This conference was in India that year. It was not close. It was 12 time zones away from where I was living. But they allowed me to go to India to present this paper. And I also took the opportunity to further my work in telemedicine for the developing world and create and present a paper on that, which was very fortuitous because the after the conference, an editor was reading that paper and said, "Hey, could you turn it into a book chapter?" So by this time, I was a second year medical student and was given an opportunity that not many students have to write a book chapter as a medical student. So that was one opportunity, and then the other part of that was um, wanting to work on this intersection between space and technology and medicine and doing good for Earth. And so I had heard about this really cool project. It sounds like science fiction, but it is reality. And it was called the NeuroArm, and it was this neurosurgical robot based on Canadarm technologies. So the Canadarm is the Canadian robotic arm that helps us do construction and repairs and maintenance outside the space station. So it was the same company that had used some of those same technologies for this robotic arm that could do brain surgery. And the benefit was it can operate on a smaller scale than a human with less tremor. And it was also compatible with an MRI. So it had a lot of advantages. And it was in the next city over. It was only about 3 hours away. So I emailed this neurosurgeon as a keen medical student, said, "Hey, this is my background. Can I come work with you for the summer?" And he said yes. Again, like a lot of things had to line up for me to have this benefit. And so I was lucky enough to be on the team that conducted the preclinical testing of NeuroArm, and got a first author publication in a major neurosurgery journal, which was really cool. And by then I was bitten by the surgery bug as well, and so that kind of tailored my interests and my rotations. Um, and there was a bit of a scenic route as well. There was a bit of a pit stop along the way because the other side of this was I had had such an amazing experience at the International Space University. Um, in between the friendships, the opportunities, the excitement, that it wasn't quite the same by the time I came back to medical school. Part of it was that I came a week late because my master's program was finishing up. So, by that time, you're already a little bit of an outsider. The friendships are formed. Um, and then part of it is that you're just kind of still riding on the momentum of an amazing life-changing experience. And so I was looking for that again, and by the time second year medical school had rolled around, um, I heard of this brand new institution called Singularity University, that had been founded by the same people who had founded the Space University, except it was much closer to home. It was based in Silicon Valley and backed by Google and NASA. And the whole idea was to leverage emerging technologies to address humanity's grandest challenges. And of course, that's something that spoke to me immediately. So again, I asked the medical faculty, I said, hey, what do you think of me doing this for the summer? But I would be late coming back to my third year rotations. They said, well, you have two options. There's no coming late to your rotations. You either come back to medical school without doing this program, or you take the year off and make the most of that year. And so again, I thought, okay, there's no harm in applying. I set some strict criteria for myself, that I have to be accepted, that I have to be accepted on full scholarship, because there is, it's not
There's
inexpensive.
some risk. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, I was lucky enough to be accepted. And again, it was game changing, because we, as a team of 9 people from 7 countries, um, took the biggest possible challenge we could take on, because the program challenged us to positively impact 1 billion people in 10 years using emerging technologies. And we thought, well, why not positively impact 7 billion people in 10 years? Let's make it a little bit more challenging. And so we took on the challenge of disaster response, and monitoring and communications. And so that, in our minds, was a problem that um, addressed anyone, anywhere, anytime. And so we worked smartphones at then were a brand new emerging technology. The geo-aware location tagging abilities we hadn't seen with flip phones before. And so we were able to create a brand new disaster management type of software that allowed offices of emergency management communicate with individuals in disaster situations in a way that was context dependent, rather based on their location. And so we spent the year building up that company, and that was just another incredible life experience in terms of the experience you get building a company, building technology, building relationships, and trying to do some good for the world. And that was, again, there were a lot of pit stops along the way, but that helped make me and send me on this journey that I'm on today.
I love hearing how you really made med school your own, because you had this interest in space. You have this vision that you want to be in the space field and use your medical degree for that. But I can imagine that it could be kind of easy to all of a sudden just fall in the trap of just having a traditional medical degree experience, because the program itself is all consuming. And I can imagine that a lot of your peers were probably focused more so just on the traditional medical path, either becoming, some sort of general physician or a specialized doctor by the end of that kind of education. So
They were a lot more focused, for sure. Yeah.
yeah, but I think that this is such a great perspective to show people how you could make it your own. You can, if you have other interests, you can participate in different conferences or different types of research experiences, like how you went and worked with that professor a few hours away, and even branching off, taking a year off too, to explore tech and building a company. So I love hearing how, even though you're in something that could be very traditional, you're able to bring in different things, make it your own. How was it connecting with your peers in medical school? Because, like you said, there's probably a lot of people who are more on the traditional path. How was that dynamic for you?
Yeah, it was definitely different, and it was really funny because my brother is only 16 months older, and we've had very he was always a year ahead of me in school, and he also went into medicine, and his words were, don't miss orientation your first year of med school because you'll have no friends. And I thought to myself, like, how could you possibly decide on whether you have friendships or not in medical school based on 1 week of interaction with people? And,
Mhm.
he was right, because by the time I came back, the bonds were already forged. But I was really lucky because I fell in with a really studious and compassionate duo. So we were a triad, and they were so studious. They were really good influences as I went on through my medical career. I would say more so now than ever. You'll eventually find your flock. Birds of a feather will flock together. And now it's in the present day and age. To give a bit of a spoiler, for me, it's the emergency medicine docs and the extreme environment docs and the space medicine and aerospace medicine docs. Like those are my people, the ones that we have the best conferences, the best conversations at, because we're all wired the same. So whether you're kind of finding your feet and finding your people in medical school or even in your career, you will eventually find it. But some of it does require a little bit of effort and sending out search beacons and signals to find them as well. I do want to emphasize the privilege of having had such a supportive medical school, to the point where I was
Mhm.
reflecting on it once I was a resident. But again, like, there are examples of stellar medical students at sister organizations and other medical schools who don't believe in the straying outside the curriculum, and were just told no. And so that really hit home to me. So there was this aerospace medical elective that I had my eye on
Mm.
since high school. And basically, you were sponsored by the Canadian Space Agency to go down to NASA's Johnson Space Center and spend a month working on a research
Oh,
project
wow.
related to human spaceflight and astronautics, and also learning about aerospace and space medicine, everything from nutrition to countermeasures to the hazards of the spaceflight environment and the computational models that NASA used. And I had my eye on that since I was in grade 12, and I knew about that opportunity, but you had to be a fourth year medical student. So this was a very playing the long game, making sure I was a competitive candidate for that when that opportunity arose. And so, I was one of 5 students that year who was sponsored by the Canadian Space Agency to go down. And it was the most fun ever. But again, coming back to this idea of um, being allowed to do this, to be able to fit that rotation into my fourth year medical school, it involved my med school saying yes. It
Mhm.
involved them allowing me to miss my fourth year comprehensive exam that tested all of medical school knowledge. It involved missing 1 month of revision and review lectures, and they said just go study on your own. And it involved me missing the advanced cardiac life support training that would have been offered, and they just said go find it on your own. They say you meet all these check boxes, and you can go to NASA. And they didn't
Wow.
have to do that. And they had colleagues who had been afforded the opportunity in other years, and they would have missed far less, and their med schools said no. So I think it
Mm.
is, I can't, I have to also give credit. And when I mentor students now, I say find an environment that believes in what you do, find an environment that will support you and amplify you, because there's so many grad students out there who try to do the same thing. And if they're in a lab that's supportive, they get the support they need to take time off and make it up elsewhere. They're trusted to get the results without fitting in rigid timelines of you have to be in the lab within these hours, versus labs that aren't supportive of that. So finding that supportive environment is so critical. I didn't realize it. I happened to fall into it, and it was just
Mhm.
it made all the difference.
Yeah, well, I think that that's such great representation for where you went, which was the University of Alberta
Yeah.
for med school, because, yeah, I think that that really showcases them in a great light too. And I feel like it was such a benefit for them to be able to support you in these decisions and straying away from the curriculum, because it's showing how you can be such a diverse medical student, a diverse doctor, a diverse physician. So I think it only reflects better on them as well to really show how you can make such an impact in the
Yeah,
world
shout out to the
too.
University of Alberta. And
Yeah.
I was a first or second year neurosurgery resident when I was thinking about that. And so just on a whim, I just sent the deans an email saying, you don't have to do that, but thank you.
Yeah.
And I just happened to see the dean the next day in the coffee line. He's like, you didn't have to send that email, but that was really nice to be recognized. So,
Yeah.
don't forget the people who've lifted you up along the way, because it's so easy to take those things for granted.
Yeah, that's a great connection too, even just being an alum from there as well and having that connection with them. I would love to hear a bit about then how it was wrapping up med school and your residency, if you specialized in something during your residency and kind of where you went from there as well.
Yeah, so I had also been bitten by the surgery bug early on. Like what you heard earlier, when I was 15, I was saying I would be a neurosurgeon. I did my research, my first year medical school research in neurosurgery. I was also really interested in plastic and reconstructive surgery. I explored head and neck surgery. So like all of my rotations were, geared towards some sort of surgical specialty. And before long, I rotated everywhere. I was at the University of Toronto, I was at Stanford, and for long, I realized that yeah, neurosurgery, coming back to the whole neuroscience thing, that's the one for me. But also kind of ignoring the elephant in the room that there's not much space involved in that, and there's not much space for space or anything else when you're in a very intense surgical subspecialty. So I applied to neurosurgery. I was lucky enough to get my top choice. And I started training in neurosurgery. And then 3 years in, it didn't, there were a whole host of factors. It was the exact opposite of the opportunity and the environment I needed to flourish where I would flourish best, in exploration in space. And
Mm.
so it was a extraordinarily hard decision. There was a lot of feelings of failure involved, because for the first time you're straying the course, you're not realizing that ambition. And then midway through third year, switched, and so I finished my training in primary care. Medicine, in family medicine, and then I fell into emergency medicine in Canada. Being a family physician allows you to practice rural emergency medicine, and I had no experience in that. Well, I had a minimal experience in that prior to graduating, but I just decided to try locuming, which is where you're a substitute teacher for doctors, and you go to towns or clinics where other doctors are away on mat leave, on sick leave, on vacation. And I just happened to fall into emergency medicine, and it's by far the most fun, amazing field. You really are problem solving. You're playing Sherlock Holmes and trying to come to a conclusion of a diagnosis, and then also solving the problem with every patient you see. And so I think everyone ends up where they need to be in medicine, and I certainly did with emergency medicine. And then suddenly I was back in this supportive environment that loved that I had this background in space, and that allowed me to take time off to go do my space endeavors. And it was day and night difference. In neurosurgery, I wasn't allowed to use my vacation time. It was frowned upon. So there was no room for anything else. Whereas having the opportunity to use your allotted vacation time allowed me to pursue all of these other interests, allowed me to get certified as a wilderness upgrade medical provider, learn about wilderness medicine, help run wilderness medicine retreats, and like see the similarities between wilderness medicine on Earth and space medicine, both being resource limited environments. So it's suddenly like I was allowed to flourish again. So it was exactly the right environment to be in.
It's great that you had that time to really explore and see what fit your interests best and what allowed you to be your best self. Is this the time where you started exploring how to combine space and medicine in your career? Even though you've already had been doing that throughout your education, what was your plan for doing that now entering the industry as a professional?
So all of the things I'd given up, all of the um, positions and networks that I hadn't been part of, I just reached out to again. A friend of mine was running one of North America's biggest space conferences. He was the conference chair, and I said, "Hey, do you need a volunteer?" I was ready to sit at tables at that point. And he knew my background. He said, "Okay, we have a brand new track. I'd like you to run it." So I was the track chair for that conference. And I just sought out all these opportunities. And at the same time, this was kind of the beginning of citizen science as well as commercial space. And I heard of this new program, and at the time it was called Project Possum. And everything in space is an acronym, and POSSUM is no different. It stood for Polar Suborbital Science of the Upper Mesosphere. And now you may know this institution as the International Institute for Astronautical Sciences. And I saw a friend of mine who was also in the space sphere. He'd applied to their program, he was accepted. And I thought, what is this? Is this some sort of space camp for adults? Like, I had no idea what to expect. But I threw my hat in the ring. I applied and I was accepted. And that was the very beginning of, really integrating space medicine into my career beyond research, beyond publications. And so in this program during the ground school, we're taught about upper mesospheric science. We're taught about suborbital flight and missions and what that means. And then there was such success with that program, additional courses were proposed, including microgravity campaigns and testing spacesuits and zero G. And so I had signed up for that course and tested one of the world's first commercial spacesuits in parabolic flight. And I had been in the program for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And, my passion for space medicine and things I'd done, whether it was research, whether it was lectures, whether it was courses, it was definitely known. And so the executive director said, can you take that experience and make a career or make a course, I should say, on space medicine? And it was a megalithic task. It was, but it was also a labor of passion. And that was when our space medicine course was born, and it's been going strong since 2017. And, we teach anyone who comes to it the principles of space medicine, the hazards of the spaceflight environment, but also how to become a bit of a space medical MacGyver and think resourcefully in resource-limited environments, borrowing on principles from wilderness medicine. And then when the pandemic came about and we couldn't do our on-site operations, and we again turned our focus to research, and I was asked to expand my scope and turn that into a working group, a group that focused on research, as well as that advised on safety and health in our operations, which we did. And to give you an idea of how far we've come, this year alone, we have put, with our partners, we have put 6 payloads, neuroscience payloads, on a commercial space flight with the AX-2 Axioms mission. We have an upcoming payload on the SpaceX Polaris Dawn mission. We just sent our first researcher to space with Kelly Girardi last month. With our inaugural suborbital spaceflight researcher. And all that came from, having the passion and then someone believing in my passion and ability to execute and help deliver on the science and, make meaningful contributions both for astronauts and human spaceflight going forward, but also for our understanding of disease processes on Earth. So that, it just feels very pinch me to say that out loud. Like, is this even real? And then also being asked by commercial space companies to come on board, either as a employee or as an advisor, which is part of what else I do. And so that came from my other extreme environment experience. So I've done 4 analog expeditions to date. And so for those who don't know, analog expeditions are going to an extreme environment that somehow replicates some aspect of the space flight environment. And so it can be a habitat in a Mars-like environment, in a Moon-like environment, or it can be just one that's isolated, confined, and remote. And those are underwater missions. So I've done 2 Aquanaut underwater missions. I've done 2 Mars simulation missions. I'm about to embark on a upcoming lunar mission simulation. And based on those experiences, an emerging Canadian immersive technology company that leverages VR for healthcare delivery had some contracts by the Canadian Space Agency and asked me to come on board and bring my expertise to help build out the clinical scenarios, both for astronauts in space as well as remote medicine on Earth. So, it just came in believing in loving what I did, having that work ethic and that passion, and then also being surrounded by teams that really believed in my ability to realize their vision.
And these missions, are they more like a volunteer experience, or are you part of some sort of company or organization with
It
that?
can be either or. So I went with
Okay.
different organizations for the Mars missions. And
Mm-hmm.
then for the underwater missions, it literally came of some of the folks I had been crewmates with on previous missions, and we just got along really great. Like, they're lifelong friends. And one of them said, okay, we've tried to be citizen scientist astronauts, but what if we were citizen scientist aquanauts? And, you're just thinking, okay, tell me more. This is really intriguing. And one of our colleagues from that mission just, pretty much lives in the ocean, was a former Special Operations Navy dive commander, and, really knew the dive community well and said, okay, I think we can make this happen. And so we did in 2019 a 5-day underwater mission called the Neptune mission, which is another acronym, and it stands for Nautical Experiments in Physiology, Technology, and Underwater Exploration. And we partnered with scientists from all around the world to do experiments in psychology and cognition and performance and technology development. And it was a tremendous success. Just being with this crew that you've worked with to build the science and get the approvals and the logistics and the ethics review for the greater part of the year, and then execute. It just felt so good. And that was actually my origin story into working with Luxonic, the VR company I work with now, because we tested their technology on that underwater mission. It is the world's first digital twin of a radiology reading room. So instead of having physical monitors to read your CT scans or x-rays on, you have it all portable and virtualized. And so as the crew medical officer on that mission, I was able to link up with the head of radiology in Saskatoon, Canada, 4,400 kilometers plus away, and we could review the simulated trauma imaging of a patient together, which has enormous implications for resource-limited environments, whether you're talking about rural environments or space flight. So, that was the genesis of that. And it was so fun. We did it again. We did it, the Neptune mission, except this time Neptune with a 2 in the middle. We did that in May of this year, this time for 6 days. And what was really cool about this is there's a bit of history involved with this, because the commander of that mission, the Navy dive commander, for him, it was also proof of concept on that first mission. He wanted to know if it's possible to create a world record and live underwater for 100 days, which no one had done before. And this year, with that proof of concept in 2019, he went for it. And so between May and June of this year, our Commander Joe Deturi, broke history by living underwater for 100 days. And we were able to rejoin him as that incipient crew just as he crossed the threshold of the world record at 78 days and spent 6 days together. So we were able to do science, but we were able to do it as this family who just worked together for so long. So it's been an incredible journey. And I think the most amazing part of it is I get to deal with amazing people. And every time we accomplish something great, it feels like, we're unraveling more to be discovered, and we're just getting started.
It seems like in this type of career, at least the way you've structured it for yourself, it seems like you also have to really take on a lot of entrepreneurship type of roles where you're doing different things, right? Like you're advising and consulting or working with the VR companies, like you said. You're also a part of the lecturing. And is that in connection with University of Alberta, by the way?
Yeah, so I lecture in a course called Technology and the Future of Medicine, on space medicine, on emerging technologies in medicine, in developing those skills to learn to think exponentially and then apply those skills, and then learning about immersive technology and VR and mixed reality. And so, it's every day is very, very different. Some days I still maintain my full-time clinical hours, just not evenly. Some months I'm working purely clinically, some months I'm purely on the road. So I still do research. I still do the entrepreneurial stuff. I still mentor. I still work clinically. It's like a box of medical chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
Wow, that's amazing. And so are you work in a physician's office then, as a physician as well?
A little bit, yeah. So that's a great question. That's an important point for anyone who's trying to figure out what they want to do and what they want their work-life balance to look like. Know what your values are and know what's most important to you. Because, for example, if you are a parent and have 3 kids, the most important thing to you is probably stability and knowing, being in the same place with the same routine. For me, it's the exact opposite. For me, it's freedom and control over my schedule. And so I work purely as a locum physician, which means I'm a substitute teacher for doctors. I fill in for anyone who needs a physician. So that means every weekend, every stat holiday, I'm in a different town in rural Alberta, covering the emergency room, covering the hospital. And I'm the only physician in the town. So it's really good for decision-making skills as well. But that means that, I don't have to worry about who's covering my practice when I'm away. I also do primary care 1 day a week with a lot of women's health in the city. But again, as a locum physician, so I don't have to worry about, having a long-term panel of patients that I'm, leaving high and dry when I go to do the other stuff.
Again, just making your career your own, and just for our listeners, showing that there's not just one path, and being, whether it be a doctor, being involved in space, there's so many different paths.
Totally.
I feel like that's a great place to lead into my last question, which is, what are your hopes for your future career development, and what do you hope to achieve?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty standard list because I've had some time to think about it. So get to space definitely is up there. Work on meaningful problems in medicine in austere environments and contribute to big problems in space medicine, as well as particularly in exploration class missions, so moon medicine and beyond, and have a lasting impact on that while bringing those benefits back to Earth.
Really have enjoyed having you on the podcast. I love representing diverse careers. I love talking about how you can really make something your own and tailor your career to fit all the things that are important to you, fit your lifestyle, fit your interests. And I'm so glad that we were able to highlight what space medicine is, because I really didn't know about it. I mean, at first thought I would have thought that they're so separate, but of course it makes sense to have them be related. And so I really enjoyed hearing about all of your different experiences and your path. So thank you so much for coming on today and sharing this with us.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope this was valuable for your listeners.
Thank you so much to Dr. Shawna Pandya for coming on the Mentorship podcast. This was such a great opportunity to learn about the field of space medicine. I said this many times throughout the conversation, but I really loved hearing how Dr. Pandya has adapted her career to her lifestyle, choosing to work as a locum physician while pursuing her passion for space. It really shows how you can broaden your horizons, even in careers that are often represented in traditional manners. I also loved learning about all the opportunities in the space industry, such as the research components and its intersection with medicine, and the various missions Dr. Pandya has completed, and really all the preparations involved in becoming an astronaut. It's a career that we don't come across regularly, but it is one that we hear about from a young age. So I'm very grateful to Dr. Pandya for coming on the podcast and really going through this career path and mentoring us. We will be back in 2 weeks for our next episode, where we will be featuring a career in marketing. So be sure to tune in. In the meantime, follow us on @MentProjects on all social media platforms for updates and more mentorship resources. We also have an anonymous feedback form in our episode description that you can complete and tell us what you are interested in hearing more about in future episodes. We would really appreciate your feedback, and thank you so much for listening.